Oh, that took a little bit of time. Can everybody hear me okay? It just flashed up with a little problem there. Can you hear me, guys? I'm going to assume that the world can hear me then.
We can hear you.
Good stuff. Okay, welcome back, everybody, into the afternoon sessions now in anger. So we've got Alistair Thorpe and Nick Sorank of Switchee, and they're going to take you through their presentation, which is, go on, Al, you do it. A billion
insights from a billion data points.
A billion, not a million, a billion. All right then, guys, have at it and have fun. Speak to you in a bit.
Great.
Thank you.
Cool. I'm just going to try and share my screen. So hopefully that's working for you. Nick, you can give me a verbal nod if that is.
Yep, definitely. Can see it.
Fabulous. Okay. Right. So good afternoon, guys. You've all digested your lunch and hopefully looking forward to the final couple of sessions here. As we've just mentioned, the presentation, the talk that we're going to deliver is called Insights from a Billion Data Points. And that's because we've got a billion data points on a few of our customers from over the last year or two. And we want to tell you what we can learn from that. I can't go any further without saying thank you to Stu and Dave and the whole DTL team. We think it's really important to do these events. It's not the same as doing face-to-face conferences, but it's still important to do it. And, you know, I like this sort of thing, but I also feel it's important to keep doing it to use your social interactive muscles a little bit so that we don't lose it. So I mentioned a billion data points. I was trying to help me and other people visualize what a billion data points would be like. And the closest I got to this is I found a picture of a million data points. So believe it or not, there's a million dots on this slide. You won't be able to denote them individually. But if you got another 999 slides of it, that would be a billion data points. So what's the point? It's a lot. It's a huge amount of data. I'm Alistair Thorpe. I'm the Commercial Director for Switchee. I've been working in and around the housing sector for the last 10 years, mainly in energy efficiency, heating, and tech. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Nick Sorank, who's our Head of Customer Success. Now, interestingly, Nick is new to housing, but has spent well over a decade in the realm of customer success in tech businesses. Some of you might not really know what we mean by customer success, so he can help explain that for you. But what Nick brings to us is a massive passion for customer satisfaction and customer outcomes, which is really important. Okay, here's the interactive part of the session. I've got a QR code like everybody else. So if you could open your photo area on your phone, if you hover it over the screen, you should be able to capture that QR code and it will take you through to a straw poll. Essentially what we want you guys to do is just select one of the options on the straw poll. And, you know, we've got a few different people in the audience. You might want to hear about different things, and we've got loads that we want to talk to you about. So if you pick the thing out of those that you're interested in, we'll make sure we cover it off in the final section of the talk. But what are we going to talk about today? So obviously, I need to tell you a little bit about Switchee and what we do for those that don't know us. But in addition to that, we want to talk to you about some of the fear points around IoT. IoT is new for some, but not for many. And so what are the learnings that we can give you from our experiences, but also this billion data points that we can analyze for you? The customer success approach, which Nick's going to talk to you about, is really key to bringing IoT and new technologies into the housing sector. We've had lots of chat over the last couple of days about how you actually start implementing it and how you make sure you make use of it. Well, that's how we're going to do it. And finally, what better way to do that than use a few examples from customers that we've spoken to already. I also can't go any further without telling you a bit about why Switchee exists. We were set up about 5-6 years ago, and we have a mission. We exist to improve the quality of life for people living in rented homes. And it's as complicated and as simple as that. Anything that we do should be to try and improve the quality of life for people living in rented homes. Now, the way that we do that is via some connected technology, which I'll talk to you about in a second. But the reason that we do it is we were aware of some really shocking statistics a few years ago that haven't really changed that much. One is that there are 2.5 million people suffering in fuel poverty in the UK. Households suffering in fuel poverty, and that means about 3.5 million people. Fuel poverty, a lot of you will be aware of, some of you won't, but essentially it's people having to choose whether to heat or eat over winter. And this can lead on to all sorts of other problems, but the really shocking thing is that it leads to over 50,000 excess deaths each year. And I think it's quite an interesting number given the current COVID statistics. This has been going on for years, and it's 50,000 excess deaths per year based on this problem. The other area that we were pretty shocked by is there's around 10 million rented properties in the UK, social housing, affordable housing, private rented. And at any given time, roughly a third of those properties will have some problem with condensation, damp, or mold. And if we were face to face now, I'd probably ask you to put your hands up if anyone has ever not had a problem with condensation, damp, and mold in one of the places that they've lived in or worked in. And very rarely can someone put their hand up to that, because it does affect all of us in the UK to varying degrees. If you have severe damp and mold, this can mean legal cases for landlords and can mean health issues for residents. So these are two big problems that we thought that we could tackle and are tackling with the use of connected technology. So that brings me to Switchee. You know our mission and why we do it, and what sort of compelled us to try and change things. And the way that we started out, this is on the bottom left of this slide, you'll see our Switchee smart thermostat. That's the first piece of hardware that we designed and manufactured in the UK for the housing market. And essentially, this goes on the wall, it controls heating, and a resident gets savings on their heating bill because it's a smart heating controller. In addition to doing that, we also have a number of sensors. So this is probably where you think of the more traditional approach to IoT, Internet of Things. We've got sensors inbuilt into the box on the wall. We look at light, we look at motion via a PIR sensor, temperature, air pressure, and humidity. We take that data along with external weather station data. So we don't have a sensor outside the property, but we do get the closest weather station data from that. And we beam all of that information up into the cloud. Now, one of the things that we have done for a long time is use the GSM network to do that. So if any of you have tried to put connected technology into your properties, you'll probably find out that it's pretty difficult. Lots of your residents have Wi-Fi, but lots of them don't. If they have Wi-Fi, they might not let you use it. And if the product or service requires an app and a smartphone, again, residents may or may not have that and may or may not want to engage with it. So you get lots of hurdles to putting connected technology into houses. So we gather the data locally, we send it via the GSM network, which means we can go into almost any property. And then in the cloud, we layer over some analytics. So we've learned quite a lot from the data over the years, and we can push that back to landlords and residents in some instances in the form of insights and alerts. Things like mold alert, abandoned property alert, heating system failure alert, fabric of the building alert, all sorts of interesting different things that you can do with that data. We display that to landlords in the form of a dashboard. That's generally how people start interacting with the data. We've done a lot of work to make it accessible and easy to understand and useful. But actually, of course, that's not going to be the long-term solution. The long-term solution is API that into your existing systems or some new systems that are IoT appropriate, so that engineers and operatives and office-based staff are going to one system to gain the benefit from this type of data. And our goal with all of this is to connect all social housing properties under one big connected ecosystem. Now, we'd love everybody to do that via Switchee as a hub, but you know, if everybody's got a connected ecosystem, that's great as far as we're concerned. And some of the benefits of doing this, we always try to split into a resident benefit and a landlord benefit. And if you've been following the news and the recent white papers and reports that have come out, there is a huge focus, as there should be, on residents in decision making and ensuring that the solutions that we give to problems are actually consulting residents as well. So for residents, they can expect lower heating bills. It's a form of digital inclusion that might not be available to them in any other way if they don't have the internet or a phone. Better engagement usually with their landlord, because we do have a messaging and communications platform. We found that they get a bit more of increased satisfaction. We're able to actually test this with them, but just being linked to the landlord and the landlord showing a bit of interest in what's happening in the property increases satisfaction. And of course, well-being. If we can identify and tackle damp and mold, that's good for residents. And from the landlord perspective, the budget holders usually, we need to make sure that this is a value and that there's some form of return on investment. So one would be remote data analytics. So getting information and data from inside properties, but remotely. Being able to make data-driven investment decisions, not based on a guy and a clipboard and a form that was filled in 5 years ago, but actually live data directly from a property. You can improve the efficiency of your properties and also your business processes around that through things like smart appointment scheduling and occupancy-based activity. And one of the final things is preemptive maintenance. This is something that I've been in and around the housing sector for 10 years now, and it was being talked about then. It's difficult, but we know it's the right thing to do. If you can stop something before it becomes a problem, it's much better for everybody involved. The final thing I'll say is just around social value creation. We haven't been talking about this recently. We started talking about it 5 years ago and then sort of took it off of our slides because actually people weren't genuinely bothered about social value. They were just kind of paying lip service. I think that's changing. And so we're talking about how solving problems can actually create social value. So finally here, before I hand over to Nick, we have been installed in over 50 housing providers' properties now over the last few years. And we've actually learned a lot from this. And probably apart from IT and tech departments, everyone else is pretty commodity based and commodity focused. And what I mean by that is, you don't need a proof of concept or a 12-month pilot to understand that you need radiators on the wall, for example. But when you're talking about things like IoT, actually it becomes one of these confusing areas for people. And essentially we understood that housing providers needed help using the new technology that they were going to get. And as such, we created the Customer Success Division, and I'll hand over to Nick to tell you a little bit more about that.
Cool. Thank you very much, Alistair. So yeah, as Al mentioned, customer success is something that is a little bit new to our sector. And that's why we wanted to give you a little bit of an intro in terms of what is it that we actually do. So put simply, what we do is help you get the most out of Switchee, get the most out of the investment that you're making. So, IoT is still a new technology. It's a lot more widespread, a lot more common than it used to be, but it is still new. And that comes with its challenges, not least knowing what to do with it exactly. But another one that we hear a lot, overcoming internal skepticism around the value of IoT in general. And that's something that many of our customers have had to deal with. So one example here, so we collected just last month 20 million data points for one of our customers. And much as the theme of this presentation is, what does that actually mean? What can you do with that data? What kind of insights can you get from it? How can you use the Switchee features to make your operations more efficient? What kind of savings will you see? And one which I think is a fair question, is this technology actually right for you at this time? Just because a smart technology exists doesn't mean that you have to have it. So what customer success does and what we do at Switchee is help you set up a pilot and guide you through it. We'll be your project coordinators. We'll use our experience from working with other housing associations and help you answer some of these questions that we just mentioned. So we can help you prove the Switchee concept and the return on investment, not just to yourself, but also with internal stakeholders, which then helps you make informed decision on wider rollouts which will be based on the actual results of the pilot. So let's take a look at some of the examples of our work so far, and crucially, what we learned from the data. So let's start with this one, fuel poverty. Al's just mentioned it there, and it is topical, obviously, with the cold weather returning. And the bottom line is, we all know why fuel poverty is bad. It's bad for people, first of all, for their physical and mental health, but also for the properties that they live in. Underheating a home can make it prone to condensation, damp, and mold. And it can cause long-term damage to the fabric of the property. But how do you calculate fuel poverty? How do you know who is affected by it? So there's a few different ways, all of which to me sound a little bit theoretical. It's all around the proportion of the income that a household spends on energy. But there's a crucial difference between what a household should be spending on energy to heat their home to a comfortable temperature and what they are spending because that's all they're able to. So with data, we can actually get a much better understanding of the reality that the residents find themselves in. We can look at the actual temperature inside the property and we can see how the residents use their heating system. And there's an example of that on the slide. So this screenshot is from one of the properties that have a Switchee installed, and it shows the external temperature in yellow, the internal temperature in blue, and the thermostat settings in red. And it is unfortunately a real example, and it's an example of someone who has only been able to turn their heating on a handful of times since the start of the heating season, and even then for only a few minutes at a time. And what you can see on the graph is that the temperature in their property is often around 15 or 16 degrees, when NHS recommend the minimum temperature inside the property to be 18 and preferably even higher. So we know why it's bad, but what can you actually do with data such as this? Well, there's a few different things. There's examples here from two of our customers. First and most importantly, you can identify who's at risk, and you can be proactive about it. So you can reach out to them directly through the device to understand their situation better and offer them help. Whether that's energy advice, help with grant funding, charitable funding, various schemes that people unfortunately tend to be unaware of. But what you probably won't be too surprised to hear is that fuel poverty data can also be an early warning indicator for rent arrears. And engaging a resident who is struggling financially as early as possible can only be a positive for both parties. And that second point actually is really important, the point around the rent arrears, because it's a good example of the value that we can generate by combining our data with the housing association's data. And there are quite a few areas where that's the case, which we'll cover in this presentation. So this situation is something that we're monitoring quite closely because unfortunately, the reality is that it could be even worse this winter than it was last winter, just because of the state of the economy and the number of people who have either lost their jobs or been on furlough. And sadly, quite a few of those schemes are due to end soon. So let's take a look at another area that might get worse because of the current situation. And we looked at this at Uncon 1 back in June, so we wanted to give you a little update in case you do remember this. So what this graph shows is the absolute humidity inside all homes that have a Switchee, right? So this is an average from thousands of properties all around the country. And that's important because, weather conditions in different parts of the country will be different. So this is pretty much all of the UK. And what you see is that the blue line, which is 2019, and the green line, which is 2020, differ quite a bit. The internal absolute humidity this year, on average, is 17% higher than last year. And that's even though the average absolute weather humidity has actually decreased by 1% over the same period, just because this year has been slightly warmer and slightly drier than the last. Very simple explanation for this increase, and that is because we're all spending more time at home, including all of us dialing into this conference, due to various lockdowns and working from home arrangements. And what that means is that we're doing more things at home that generate moisture, being there, first of all, cooking more, washing the dishes, and so on. So what does that mean? Well, Alistair actually wrote a good article recently about this, and he said a mold bomb is coming. And that's true, because the conditions for mold are already present in a significant proportion of social housing, as we just heard. Estimates are hard to get, but typically around 30%. And that was even before the current situation. So right now, all of our properties are at higher risk of mold than they were previously. And of course, everyone would rather fix that problem before it escalates. Nobody wants mold. It's bad for residents, for their health. It's bad for landlords because of various reasons, including the fitness for human habitation legislations, which means that mold disrepair cases can easily cost £10,000 to £11,000 on average. So how can data help with this? Well, it can help you identify high-risk properties early, and that is key because you can tackle the issue before it escalates. You can use the messaging function to conduct remote condition surveys. You can identify properties with visible mold. You can arrange follow-up site visits where necessary. And all of this while increasing resident satisfaction and keeping your maintenance costs down. And this is exactly what we've done with a few of our customers. So there's a few examples here, and the one I want to highlight is Broadland Housing, where we were able to prevent several likely disrepair cases. And in one case, the resident actually had visible mold in the property since they first moved in, which was 16 years ago, and never reported it. Now, before fitness for human habitation legislation, that would have been on the resident to report, and if they haven't, it's kind of up to them really. But that's not the case anymore, and this could have easily resulted in a disrepair case. And that's one of many reasons why it's so important to act as early as possible. So the data can help identify high-risk properties, but it also helps to evaluate the repair. And here's one such example from VAHD. Similar story, it was a high-risk property, which then they went into, installed a new ventilation system, and you can see the impact that's had on the humidity inside the property. So put simply, you can use the data to figure out what works and what doesn't. And you can use it for individual properties, as you can see here, but you can also use it to validate long-term investment across the stock. Whether that's new ventilation, insulation, new heating systems, and so on. So the data then helps you test the effectiveness of that retrofit solution before you invest millions of pounds in retrofitting thousands of properties. So all of this is linked, of course. Fuel poverty means cold and moldy homes. That increases disrepair costs. That leads to an increase in arrears, tenancy churn, and void costs. And you can use the data to reduce the likelihood of all of these happening. Another area, and if there are any heating engineers in the audience, they'll know exactly just how mad the rush is for boiler repairs in the first few weeks of the heating season. But the reality is that many of those boilers were probably faulty for a while. It's just that they haven't been switched on for several months and no one knew. So being able to test them remotely improves resident satisfaction because they haven't got to deal with a faulty heating system when they need it. But it also reduces engineer stress levels, and it reduces the overtime hours that you need to pay for. So here's an example of what it meant for one of our customers, Flagship. So when they ran this remote boiler test, they found a boiler failure rate of just over 3%, which is actually quite significant when you consider the thousands of properties that they have. And the saving from just being able to repair them in their own time during the quiet period, during the warm period, was around £124. Again, quite significant when you multiply it. So another area which is always important, communication with our residents, but especially now when visiting them in person is difficult. And unfortunately, our traditional communication methods such as letters, text messages, etc., are both expensive and ineffective. Our customers typically get a 20 to 22% response rate, something in that region. And that's a problem for various reasons, not least that they're wasting a lot of money sending letters that no one's going to respond to, but being unable to survey their residents, being unable to communicate important changes. But it's also an issue with appointment scheduling, with the cost of failed call-outs being very high for all housing associations. Let's take a look at a few examples. So we worked with Optivo to improve their survey capabilities, and they got a response rate which was around 4 times higher than usual, at a fraction of the cost. And the reason for that is that the device is installed centrally in people's homes, and it's guaranteed that they will receive and see the message, which you can't really say for texts and for emails and letters and so on. But what about appointment scheduling? So how can the data help there, and what have we learned with our customers? So the gas engineers have to enter a property at least once a year, and sometimes more than once a year, to perform the annual gas safety check, or LGSRs. But in reality, there's very little incentive for the resident to be available, because as long as the heating system still works, it doesn't really make too much of a difference to them. So it's quite different from repairs from that point of view. And because of that, these gas safety checks have a really poor first-time access rates. So what we were able to do is then to combine that improved visibility of the messaging system with the occupancy data, which then predicts the likelihood of someone being at home at different times of the week, as you can see here. And that helps the housing associations schedule an appointment time that works for them and the resident. And that means that the chances of a wasted visit are significantly lower. Plus, you can then do all sorts of things through the API, such as automating appointment reminder messages, for example, 7 days and 1 day before the appointment, just to make sure that people are aware and they will be present. So it is a bit of a change in business practices, and something that my team and I have been working with our customers to implement. But we think and they think it's worth the effort, and here's why. So here's a couple of those customers that we just mentioned, and these stats that you see here are for those LGSRs. So for Flagship, for example, their first-time access rate went from 44%, which is fairly typical, to 86%, so almost double. Which, no doubt that sounds impressive, but what does that actually mean for housing providers? We talked about improving your efficiency, but what is the impact of that improved efficiency on your costs? So we mentioned earlier there's always going to be some skepticism around a new technology. That's just normal. The sales pitch sounds great. Alistair is very slick in his delivery, but it wouldn't be the first time that something didn't live up to expectations. So what does the reality then look like? Well, that is exactly what we would help you to test and quantify. So we can work with the stakeholders in each of your departments to put together a bespoke business case. And as we mentioned earlier, that then helps you to make an informed decision on the wider rollout and get buy-in from your executive team. So here's one example that came from a business case like that. So this is from Flagship, who calculated that our product becomes ROI positive in less than 2 years, which is quite significant for something that is built to last pretty much as long as a boiler does, so 10 to 15 years as a minimum. And if you'd like, you can download this case study and many more from our website, or you can get in touch afterwards if you'd like to get more information on this. But there's just one thing that I wanted to mention before I pass back to Alistair, and that is that a big advantage of working with a more nimble business like Switchee is that our product keeps being developed. What that means is that you aren't just a customer who's buying something off the shelf and having to adapt yourself to it. We don't yet have answers for everything, but you can influence our product development roadmap, and we will be your strategic partners in this journey rather than just a vendor. So if you want to see a new feature being developed, just let us know. Most of the features that we just talked about and the upcoming ones that we have were developed in partnership with our customers. So that's it from me. I'm going to pass back to Alistair to discuss the results of the poll.
Thanks very much, Nick. If you just click on the slide, that would be great. So the results from the poll are in. I know this is the highlight of maybe your week. So we asked if you wanted to find out about condensation, damp and mold and legal disrepair, and that's mainly what people wanted to hear about. I feel that Nick has covered that off for you. We changed his slides mid-flow and made sure that he delivered information about that for you. So that's done, I think, tick. The next one on the list was around net zero and energy efficiency. So we haven't really picked up on this. Net zero is a target for all of us. Climate change is something that we're all kind of aware of, and it affects our personal and professional lives in different ways. From a housing perspective, it sort of manifests in a few different things. There's been a lot more chat about it recently with regards to the green recovery, with regards to green home grants, social housing decarbonisation funds and different budgets that are available. But also, as housing providers, you have targets to hit with regards to improving the efficiency of your properties. And that's mainly based around improving the EPCs of your properties. So we were interested with these different areas of relevance to kind of say, look, we've got some features that are interesting for individual departments and people and solve individual problems, but actually from a strategic level, your CEOs, exec directors, and you in the audience are being asked to solve these problems, and we can help. So with net zero, Switchee will have an impact on EPC levels in the new year. And this is something that we've been working with government on for over 3 years now. It's not confirmed yet. It's not out there and it's not happening yet, but it will be next year. So you heard it here first. Also, to link to a question that I've seen in the question and answer, we've been working with BEIS quite a lot on remote energy performance. So whether it's your new build stock that you bring on board, whether it's your existing stock, soon enough, and I mean like 2 years, maybe 3, there'll be a requirement for you to prove the energy efficiency of your properties, not just send someone round to do an EPC every few years, but actually remotely prove the performance of that property. That's something that we've been involved with. One of the guests here, I don't know if they're on at the moment, but Halton Housing via the SMETA project to look into the viability of using our technology to do that. And that's really exciting. You don't need to rely on Savills to go and do all of your all of the appointments. You can just look on your dashboard and do it remotely, and then angle the investment to where it's needed. The other area that from the poll that you were looking at was the kind of grant funding side. So I mentioned the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund. This was a pot of a few million, I think it was 50 million actually, that was put to one side to help landlords perform deep retrofit. And within a lot of these funded schemes, there is a requirement for monitoring. And the requirement for monitoring is twofold. They want to get smart technology in the first place because it's a good opportunity to do that. But they also want to look for unintended consequences. One of the things that deep retrofit is trying to do is to get away from slapping some insulation on a property and then causing a load of condensation, damp and mold because you haven't ventilated it properly. And putting a system like Switchee in allows residents to sort of engage with their heating a bit more, which is one big component. Check how the property is performing in terms of the ventilation, the humidity, the heating, etc. And then warn people if there's any issues with that. The final one is probably the electrification of heat. This isn't a buzzword that everybody knows about yet, but probably will. There's been an understanding that if you can provide electricity via the grid, via renewable sources, so you green the electricity grid, that makes anything that uses electricity essentially a renewable product. And the fear is that if you try and move a load of gas boilers onto heat pumps, that the network will fail and it won't work. And to be honest, if you did that today, it wouldn't work. But actually what we're doing is working with providers like Kenza who provide ground source heat pumps. And we're looking at being able to talk to the energy companies to understand if we know when a property should be heated, we know when it's suitable to heat stored hot water, for example, or the property. We can talk to the grid to understand when the best time is to do that, or the cheapest time. And then, like PVs and batteries and electric cars, you then have heating systems that are part of this network loading. So that doesn't feel like it's anything to do with housing, but I promise you it is. We're being installed in hundreds of properties with ground source heat pumps to do demand side response like this. And your future may be more around being an energy company, being a provider of conditions within properties, not just the properties themselves. So quite a few interesting things there. I think what we might do is shut up for a bit and maybe Stu, I don't know if you wanted to ask any of these questions, or Dave, or how you wanted to do that, but we're kind of done with the presenting. I did have one last thing I wanted to say, sorry, and it's kind of a summary, which is IoT is definitely out there and it's happening. As I mentioned, we've maybe 55 clients now that have got Switchee on the wall. We can help if you're worried about it, if your organization is worried about it. That's what Nick's team is here for, to kind of guide you through that. And look, it works. When it's rolled out efficiently and you're supported in doing that to make sure that the different stakeholders can use it, it becomes an invaluable tool. And there are a number of housing providers that are quite a long way down that road now, and changing their business processes around the data that they can get from IoT. And that was all I wanted to say. So thank you for listening, and we'll do some questions, I guess.
Cheers, Al. Yeah. So the first question we've got at the top is, how do landlords install the Switchee box? Do they do it themselves, or does Switchee do this?
Cool, really easy, quick one. Most of the time we train up DLOs or existing contractors. We can provide installers if required, but it's not what we normally do. Okay.
Does it benefit the resident financially, having a Switchee box?
Through savings, yeah. So we save them money on their heating bill.
Have you got any stats that kind of back that up?
Thermostat, yes, I do have some stats. So we were involved in an independent study in some housing properties quite a while ago, which was a European funded study that showed over 17% saving on heating bills. We say 10 to 15, which is what we see. Some people take savings as additional comfort, and then other people take it as pound note savings. So it's somewhere around the 10 to 15% mark.
Okay, so we've got a question here from Garrett Jones. I understand the power of using sensors to capture the data. We all have thousands of properties. Putting in sensors in all properties would be expensive. How do you identify where you should install?
Good question. You should put them everywhere. So we are aiming to get the hardware, and we believe we're actually there to get the hardware in a position where you can stick it in every property, and we've got some clients that are doing that over the next 5 to 7 years. But it's a good question. Lots of people think about this as specific problems that you're going to solve with a sensor. We want to know if there's damp and mold in properties. Well, if we put humidity sensors in every property, everything will be fine. But what we're offering is actually a hub these days. So we've stopped talking about smart thermostats quite a lot. It's helpful for residents to think about it in that way. But for you, it's an IoT hub. You can link additional sensors if you need to, but essentially you can do most of it via the Switchee hub there, and you'll get benefit from it going in any property that you have.
I think Garrett was trying to get to the point of, if I've got 5,000 properties, it's a pretty big proposition to put a Switchee box in those 5,000. I think he was just trying to find out, is there something that you guys work with a potential client to actually prioritize where Switchee boxes should go in?
You can prioritize, of course. So it's either by need or by available budget, right? So you either go, let's put it in old, I'm trying not to swear, bad quality properties. So you either put it there, and that's a good place to go. The older the better, because you're going to find out more about it, especially if it hasn't been on a regen program for a long time. Or you go with the budget. So we do have some clients that trial Switchee in new build properties, for example, and they would think that they're not going to get much interesting data there, but they've got lots of cash to spend on new builds. The reality is we find out that these properties haven't been built to the specification that they were meant to. We find overheating in new build properties all the time, and we're able to let the housing provider know about that before they take it on after the 12-month defect period. So we sort of save them some money there as well.
Okay, thanks.
What I would just add to that point, actually, once someone's gone through the pilot, as we've just seen, what they will find is that the devices are ROI positive. So although there's an upfront investment to be made to get these purchased and installed, the actual longer term benefits to the housing association financially are net positive by a significant margin. So that, in my mind, answers the kind of this is expensive question.
Okay. I'm just trying to check. There's a question here. It seems like a lot of analysis. It must have been from I think your section, Nick, where it was a lot of data coming in. So the question is, seems like a lot of analysis we'd have to do. Not sure I've got the bandwidth. Do you help with that?
Absolutely, both through our team, but also through the dashboard. So we do prioritize properties by the severity of the problem, because you haven't got the bandwidth to manually analyze 5,000 properties. So we do a lot of that work for you. We create actionable insights, again, both through the team and through the dashboard. And all of this is included in our standard service. So nothing that people need to pay extra for and so on. I'm not sure who asked the question, but if they'd like more specific information around what we can do to help, I'd love to speak to them afterwards.
No worries. Question from Gabby. Is Switchee involved in data gathering to provide evidence to government and other decision makers that we need to homes that provide healthy and safe environments for people to live in?
So just with regards to that, it's difficult to answer the full question, but what I can say is we've tried as much as possible to get BEIS and Ofgem to be involved, and I believe that we've got there. So we've got impact on things like EPCs, but we also have them including monitoring in these projects to make sure that there aren't these unintended consequences. And in our small way, we think that we've helped turn their heads towards making sure that you monitor the things that you're investing in from government. Whether they're using all of that to determine their big policies around housing, I doubt it, but we're trying. So yeah.
Okay. I'm not going to ask my question because that's just self-serving. There's a question here, a question not asked enough at this Uncon. How does Switchee use data in its own business? Do you practice what you preach?
Nick, are you looking away because you're not answering that? Or, yeah. if it was upstairs.
Yes, we do is the answer.
So you've got Switchee box as well, haven't you?
All of us do, yeah. So we use them to trial new settings, new ways of interacting with the screen, testing new features, and most of us can use it as our heating controller as well. So we try to use the product that we have where possible, and also, you know, we're a tech business. We've been using multiple different tech stacks and working remotely since day dot, and we're quite far advanced in that sense.
Cool. We have run out of time, but there's one final question. It's from Joe Ward of Splunk. This is a fantastic use case to be involved with and use that data for real-time insights in line with the desired outcomes. What are the logistics of rolling out sensors en masse, though?
Nick?
Simple. So there's a few different ways that you can do it for a housing association. Typically, the most cost-effective one is to get us specified on existing programs such as boiler replacement schemes, void schemes, new builds, as Al said as well. So that helps with the logistics, and it helps to keep the costs down.
And the final thing I'll add there, something that isn't happening a lot, but that could happen, is the only thing that a landlord has to enter a property for every year, which means that you could do a program in 1 year, is the gas safety check. So if they make an allowance for additional time on site, you could install a Switchee in every property within 1 year that has a gas connection at least.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, guys. Thank you very much for your presentation, and
Great.
Thanks for doing that little Q&A. I hope it was useful for the delegates. And of course, we're now going into another break. We are far too generous. So hunt out Nick and hunt out Al if you want to learn anything more about Switchee.
Yeah.
So see you in half an hour, guys. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.